It's my great pleasure to introduce Peter Berkowitz. Progressivism has a long and rich history, and Peter is going to discuss its old and new versions tonight and the unresolved tension in the modern version between egalitarianism and elitism.
President Barack Obama and the congressional Democrats whom he leads present many puzzles. The one I want to explore today begins with the discrepancies between the promises candidate Obama made on the campaign trail and the policies President Obama has pursued in office. Candidate Obama promised to bring a new tone to Washington, but from his administration's vilification of Rush Limbaugh, to its orchestrated efforts to delegitimize Fox News, to his insistence that opponents of his vision of health care reform are mean-spirited and obstructionist, President Obama has sought to equate disagreement with his policies and administration to ignorance or immorality. Now today, of course, most progressives will find such language, Crowley's language, namely, the average American individual is morally and intellectually inadequate to a serious and consistent conception of his responsibilities as a Democrat. Most progressives today will find such language jarring, or at least not fit for public consumption. After all, behind closed doors to raise money from wealthy San Francisco donors, progressives have been known to speak of voters in Pennsylvania and Ohio who bitterly cling to their guns and religion. That's pretty jarring language and pretty close to asserting that, quote, the average American individual is morally and intellectually inadequate to a serious and consistent conception of his responsibilities as a Democrat. Now, the new progressivism arose in the post-1960s politics and has been refined and taken to a new level by President Obama. Like the original progressivism, the new progressivism proclaims its desire to democratize American political institutions by making them more responsive to the will of the people. And like the original progressivism, it has confidence in the ability of insulated elites to administer on the people's behalf. And it doubts, in a variety of ways, the ability of people to recognize their true interests. But in contrast to the original progressivism, the new progressivism obscures its awkward combination of egalitarianism and elitism. This seems to be true of Obama's rhetoric and a style of governance. It's certainly on vivid display in cutting-edge progressive academic thinking. Like the deliberative Democrats, the new pragmatism makes use of a fundamental deception. It purports to focus on practical consequences and to eschew fixed or dogmatic opinions. In fact, the new pragmatism equates what works with what works to increase government's responsibility to promote social justice in America, progressively understood. But in the process, it can't escape contradiction. On the one hand, the new pragmatism reduces morality to interest and dismisses the distinction between true and false as a delusive vestige of an obsolete metaphysics. On the other hand, it treats the progressive interpretation of America as in effect good and true, empirically and metaphysically. Under the guise of inclusiveness, it denigrates and excludes rival moral and political opinions. So too it sometimes seems for Obama's pragmatism. It appears to be another name for achieving progressive ends. Flexibility is confined to the means. This helps to explain the sometimes glaring gap between Obama's glistening post-partisan promises and his aggressively partisan politics. Judging by his conduct, as pragmatism officially instructs us to do, Obama appears to have concluded that the best way to maintain public support for progressive programs is to divert attention from the full range of their consequences and, where possible, to refrain from making progressive principles too explicit. A pattern has become visible. It can be seen in candidate Obama's carefully choreographed efforts to present himself as not only a determined Democrat and devoted progressive, but also as a moderate post-partisan pragmatist. In a massive stimulus bill sold to the public as necessary to jumpstart the economy, but loaded with non-stimulus social spending. In a health care reform bill defended by the president as a cost-cutting measure and required to address the economic crisis, but whose government option and government arrogation of administrative responsibilities is likely to add hundreds of billions to the national debt over the next decade. In the administration's efforts to demonize opposition and to adopt, strangely enough, a "you're either with us or against us" approach to domestic politics. And in the President's and in Justice Sotomayor's repeated insistence in the years before her Senate confirmation hearings that empathy was a crucial quality for a judge, coupled with the unequivocal repudiation of its importance in testimony before the Senate Judiciary Committee. The pattern involves a concerted effort to conceal the inspiration, ultimate aim, and full cost of positions, policies, and programs, though advanced in the public's name, would not, if forthrightly explained, garner majority support. This is an awkward orientation for progressives. It treats the public as too simple-minded or mean-spirited to adopt the correct policies for the correct reasons. It overlooks that government is often a bad judge of what citizens deserve and poorly equipped to ensure equal outcomes. In seeking to expand government's responsibility for managing citizens' lives, it diminishes freedom. And it's blind to those opinions about justice to which conservatives are more attuned. In conclusion, despite all that I've said, I want to emphasize that my criticism of the new progressivism is not directed against the need, the ever-present need for reform. I agree with the conservative liberal Edmund Burke, who argued that liberty requires devotion to the principles of conservation and to the principles of correction or reform. I agree with the progressive liberal John Stuart Mill, who argued that free societies need both a conservative party and a progressive party, one that specializes in the preservation of order and the other specializing in adapting to changing circumstances. And finally, I agree with the authors of The Federalist. They believe that our experiment in self-government, which is grounded in the consent of the governed, must avoid pandering to democratic prejudices in order to better secure liberty for all. And with that, I'll stop.